Welcome to another exploration video. Today, I'm standing at the edge of what many consider one of America's most notorious ghost towns, Helltown, Ohio. The name alone sends shivers down your spine, doesn't it? As I look at the overgrown road ahead, I can't help but wonder what secrets lie hidden in these abandoned streets and decaying buildings. Helltown wasn't always called by this ominous name. Originally known as Boston Village, this small community in Summit County, Ohio, has a history dating back to the late 1700s. But something happened here that transformed a once thriving settlement into a place shrouded in mystery and fear. A place that would eventually earn the nickname Helltown. As I begin walking down the main road, the silence is almost deafening. There's something unsettling about a place that was once filled with human activity, now standing completely still, as if frozen in time. The trees have reclaimed much of what was once civilization, their branches reaching across the cracked pavement like grasping fingers. The official story of Helltown's abandonment is relatively straightforward. In 1974, President Gerald Ford signed legislation that allowed the National Park Service to purchase land for the Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area. Through eminent domain, the government bought out homeowners and businesses, forcing residents to leave their properties. Many homes were boarded up, awaiting demolition, while others were left to slowly decay. But as with any abandoned place, especially one with such an evocative name, the truth quickly became entangled with legend. Stories began to circulate, tales of chemical spills causing mutations, government cover-ups of toxic waste, satanic cults performing rituals in the woods, and ghostly apparitions haunting the empty buildings. Helltown became a magnet for urban explorers, thrill seekers, and paranormal investigators. I'm approaching what locals call the end of the world, a sharp drop-off on Stamford Road where the pavement suddenly ends. Standing here, looking out over the valley below, it's easy to see how this place earned its dramatic nickname. The road simply vanishes, as if whatever lay beyond was swallowed by some unknown force. The legends surrounding this spot are particularly chilling. Some claim that if you park your car at the edge and put it in neutral, mysterious forces will push it back uphill. Others speak of a phantom hearse that appears in rearview mirrors, driven by a faceless figure. While I haven't experienced anything supernatural yet, there's no denying the eerie atmosphere that permeates this place. Moving deeper into Helltown, I come across the remnants of what was once Boston Cemetery. Established in 1858, this graveyard predates the abandonment of the town by more than a century. Many of the tombstones are weathered and cracked, some dating back to the Civil War era. Local legend speaks of a ghostly figure known as the Peninsula Python that supposedly guards the cemetery, though historians attribute this tale to a publicity stunt by a local newspaper in the 1940s. What makes this cemetery particularly unsettling is the presence of what some call the Gravity Hill nearby. Similar to the phenomenon at the end of the world, objects placed on this hill allegedly roll upward rather than down. While scientists explain this as an optical illusion created by the surrounding landscape, standing here alone, watching the shadows lengthen as afternoon turns to evening, it's easy to understand why supernatural explanations have taken root. One of the most persistent legends of Helltown centers around the old Boston Township School, which stood abandoned for many years before being demolished. Urban explorers who ventured inside reported strange symbols painted on the walls, evidence of occult rituals, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to permeate the building. Some claimed to hear children's laughter echoing through the empty hallways, while others reported seeing shadowy figures moving past the windows. As I walk past where the school once stood, I can't help but feel a certain heaviness in the air. Whether it's the weight of history or something more supernatural is hard to say. The school, like many buildings in Helltown, became a canvas for rumors and fears, a physical manifestation of the unease that abandoned places often inspire in us. Perhaps the most infamous structure in Helltown was the so-called Highway to Hell, a stretch of Stamford Road that cuts through the heart of the abandoned community. Lined with boarded-up houses, this road became notorious for alleged sightings of mutated animals, believed by some to be the result of a chemical spill from a nearby plant. Others claimed the mutations were caused by government experiments conducted in secret facilities hidden beneath the town. Standing on this road now, watching the wind stir the overgrown vegetation, it's difficult to separate fact from fiction. There's no evidence of any chemical spill or government conspiracy, yet the stories persist, becoming more elaborate with each retelling. That's the thing about abandoned places. They become blank slates for our fears and imaginations, empty stages where we can project our darkest thoughts. Another landmark that fueled Helltown's sinister reputation was the slaughterhouse, an old building that, according to legend, was once used by satanic cults for their rituals. In reality, it was likely just an abandoned barn or storage facility, but its dilapidated appearance and remote location made it perfect fodder for frightening stories. Some claimed to hear screams coming from inside at night, while others reported seeing strange lights and figures moving about. The Mother of Sorrows Catholic Church is another site that features prominently in Helltown lore. Built in 1832, this church remains standing, even as the community around it was abandoned. Its Gothic architecture and isolated position on a hill contributed to its ominous reputation. Stories circulated about upside-down crosses appearing on the walls, ghostly priests wandering the grounds, and strange ceremonies being performed after dark. In reality, the church was deconsecrated and eventually demolished, but its memory lives on in the tales told about Helltown. It represents something that makes abandoned places so fascinating: the juxtaposition of the sacred and the profane, of faith and fear, of what was once cherished now left to ruin. As I continue my exploration, I come across what locals call the Helltown hearse. Not an actual vehicle, but a spot where many claim to have seen a phantom hearse parked along the road. According to legend, if you see this ghostly vehicle, it means death is coming for you or someone close to you. Some versions of the story include a faceless driver who stares at passers-by, while others speak of the sounds of screaming coming from inside the hearse. The sun is starting to set now, casting long shadows across the abandoned landscape. This is when Helltown truly comes alive in the imagination, when the boundary between day and night, between reality and fantasy, begins to blur. The rustling of leaves becomes whispered conversations, and the creaking of old wood transforms into footsteps following just behind you. One of the most persistent mysteries of Helltown involves the mutant town legends. According to these tales, a chemical spill from a nearby plant caused mutations in local wildlife, and even some residents who refused to leave. People reported seeing deformed animals and strange, humanoid creatures lurking in the woods after dark. Some even claimed that the government's real reason for evacuating the town was to cover up these mutations. Environmental records show no evidence of any significant chemical spill in the area, and wildlife studies have found no abnormal mutation rates. Yet the stories persist, perhaps because they tap into our deep-seated fears about environmental contamination and government secrecy. In an age of real environmental disasters and cover-ups, the mutant town legend finds fertile ground in our collective anxiety. As night falls completely, Helltown takes on an entirely different character. The darkness seems thicker here, more absolute. The abandoned buildings become mere silhouettes against the night sky, their empty windows like vacant eyes staring out at nothing. This is when most visitors turn back, when the thrill of exploration gives way to a more primal fear of the unknown. But I press on, flashlight in hand, determined to experience Helltown in all its eerie glory. There's something compelling about facing our fears, about standing in a place that so many have imbued with supernatural significance, and asking, what is really here? What am I actually experiencing? And what am I bringing with me? The Boston Cemetery looks particularly unsettling at night. The weathered gravestones cast strange shadows in the beam of my flashlight, and the inscriptions, some dating back more than 150 years, speak of lives long forgotten. There's a peculiar silence here, broken only by the occasional rustle of nocturnal animals moving through the underbrush. I pause at one particularly old grave, the name almost completely worn away by time and weather. Who were you, I wonder? Did you live your entire life in this town? Did you watch it grow and change? Could you ever have imagined that it would one day be abandoned? that your final resting place would become part of a place called Helltown? Moving away from the cemetery, I follow what was once a residential street. The houses here are in various states of decay, some merely boarded up, others collapsing in on themselves, reclaimed by nature. Each one represents a life interrupted, a family forced to leave their home behind. There's something profoundly sad about that, beyond all the spooky stories and urban legends. I approach one house that seems slightly better preserved than the others. The windows are boarded up, but the structure itself appears relatively intact. According to local lore, this is the Helltown Witch House, supposedly once home to a practitioner of dark magic who refused to leave when the government bought the land. Some claim to have seen strange lights inside and heard chanting late at night. Standing outside this house in the darkness, it's easy to understand how such stories take root. There's something inherently unsettling about abandoned homes. They're places that were once filled with life and are now empty, silent monuments to what once was. They represent a disruption in the natural order of things, a reminder that nothing lasts forever. As midnight approaches, I find myself at what remains of the old Boston Mills Road. This area was once the heart of the community, with shops, schools, and churches. Now, it's barely recognizable as a former settlement. Nature has reclaimed much of it, with trees growing through what were once foundations and vines crawling up the few structures still standing. It's here, in what was once the center of town, that I feel most strongly the weight of Helltown's history. Not the fabricated history of satanic cults and government conspiracies, but the real history of a community that was uprooted, of families that were forced to leave their homes, of a place that was sacrificed for the greater good of environmental conservation. The creation of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which ultimately led to the abandonment of Boston Village, was not without controversy. Many residents fought the government's use of eminent domain, arguing that they were being unfairly displaced. Some refused to leave until the very last moment, clinging to homes that had been in their families for generations. This human element is often lost in the sensationalized stories about Helltown. Behind the spooky legends and supernatural claims, there's a very real story of loss and displacement, of a community that ceased to exist, not because of any mysterious force, but because of a government decision that prioritized environmental conservation over the preservation of a historic settlement. As I prepare to leave Helltown behind, I can't help but reflect on what draws us to places like this. Is it simply the thrill of fear, the adrenaline rush that comes from putting ourselves in situations that feel dangerous? Or is there something deeper at work, a fascination with abandonment, with the visible passage of time, with spaces that have been touched by human hands and then left to decay? Perhaps abandoned places like Helltown appeal to us because they represent a break in the normal flow of things. Most buildings are constructed, used, and eventually demolished to make way for something new. But abandoned buildings exist in a kind of limbo, not fully alive with human activity, but not fully gone either. They're reminders of our impermanence, of the fact that everything we build will someday be left behind. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe we're drawn to places like Helltown because they allow us to confront our fears in a controlled way. We can walk these abandoned streets, peer into these empty buildings, listen for ghostly voices, and then return to the safety and comfort of our normal lives. It's a way of playing with fear, of experiencing the thrill of the unknown without any real danger. Whatever the reason, Helltown continues to captivate the imagination, to draw visitors seeking thrills or answers, or simply a brush with the mysterious. The legends grow with each telling, becoming more elaborate, more detached from the reality of what actually happened here. And perhaps that's fitting, a place that no longer exists as it once did, transformed into something that exists primarily in our collective imagination. As I make my way back to my car, the first hints of dawn are beginning to lighten the eastern sky. I've spent the night in Helltown and encountered no ghosts, no mutants, no satanic cultists. Only the quiet, somewhat melancholy atmosphere of a place that was once home to many and is now home to none. Yet I can't deny that there's something special about this place, something that gets under your skin and stays with you. Perhaps it's simply the power of suggestion, the weight of all those stories I'd heard before coming here. Or perhaps there really is something in the atmosphere of Helltown, some residual energy left behind by all the lives that once intersected here. I start my car and take one last look at the abandoned landscape in my rearview mirror. Helltown may not be the supernatural hotspot that legend makes it out to be, but it's a powerful reminder of how quickly the things we build can be reclaimed by nature, how easily a thriving community can become a ghost town, and how readily we fill abandoned spaces with our fears and fantasies. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Helltown. If you enjoyed this journey into one of America's most notorious abandoned places, please consider subscribing to see where we'll explore next. Until then, remember that sometimes the most fascinating mysteries aren't supernatural at all. They're the very human stories of places left behind, waiting for someone to remember them.